Thanks to Bob and to Justin, and now it's my pleasure to welcome Namal. I knew I was going to do that. I knew it. I'm sorry. Nalamasu of Applied Ventures and Applied Materials. He's the Chief Technology Officer of Applied Materials, and he and Anand are doing a phenomenal job with Applied Ventures, and we're really looking forward to hearing Am's perspectives on how they're running their program and the intersect of their venture capital unit to the parent's innovation strategy. So thank you, Am. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've been called worse. I had a much fancier title after my PR guys are done with my title. So I started with this and ended up with All the Light You Can See. Then I ended up reading the book, quite interesting. And in fact, a movie adaptation has come on Netflix. It is written by a famous Doerr, not John Doerr, but by Anthony Doerr. So if you have a chance, take a look at that movie. What I like to do today is talk about ventures and how it is an intimate and strategic part of Applied Ventures' overall corporate goals. So my presentation does contain some forward-looking statements and other information, and use it wisely. So just a 30-second commercial on the company. We are about $23 billion last year in revenue. The current run rate is about $25 billion. We invest $2.5 billion in R&D, roughly about 30,000 employees now in 19 countries. And we have about 15,700 patents issued, another 12,000 or so at various stages of prosecution. We, on average, protect 4 inventions every day, Saturday, Sunday, and holidays. And this business is very intensive with respect to IP. So, last couple of years have been difficult at a personal level for all of us with COVID. But the story I'm going to tell is a different story about how exciting last several years have been in the semiconductor industry, in the history of Applied Materials, and actually Applied Ventures, which is the corporate VC arm of Applied Materials. So if you are following the semiconductor industry, you can call it a renaissance, a resurgence in the industry. And if you look at waves of innovation in the industry, it's started with mainframes and has gone into basically PC plus internet. Much of the growth we have seen in the last 15, 20 years is really driven by the mobility, the smartphones and tablets and so on. And we are obviously in the era of AI and big data. And one interesting statistic is that in 2018, machine-generated data surpassed human-generated data. And in fact, by 2025, less than 5% data is human-generated. 95% actually is machine-generated. Other interesting thing is that it took the industry almost 70 years to reach $500 billion in revenue mark. Last year, it was $560 billion. And it would only take another 7 years to generate another $500 billion in revenue. So it's projected to be about $1 trillion by 2030. It's a hard time actually saying trillion, but it looks like it could be even bigger than that. And as you all recognize, it is really driven by acceleration of digitalization of the world that's taking place. Multiple inflections, Industry 4.0, AR, VR, and AI being an indispensable tool for any industry. So all of these things are simultaneously driving the industry forward. And there is also a new recognition: economic prosperity, industrial leadership, and national security are also intimately tied to the leadership in the semiconductor industry, or having secure supply chains so you can be a leader globally. So that's basically causing investments across the globe. There is a CHIPS Act which is being considered for passing soon, basically, from an appropriation perspective. There are equivalent things going on in China, Europe, and India, and elsewhere. So all of these are really creating new demand for the semiconductor industry. What do is semiconductor processing, but we look at it from a different angle. What the industry has done over the last 70 years is develop some amazing technologies. So you have the ability to atomically control thin films. So you can put 60 plus miles of copper in half-inch square computer chip. That's roughly the distance between Monterey and Palo Alto. You can modify the first 3 monolayers of a material, so which is equivalent to manipulating a business card on a tall building. You can drill 1 trillion contact holes, and you can analyze some amazing capabilities have been developed there, which is like equivalent to finding a single ant from outer space and being able to identify its species in a second. But that's as exciting as it is. I think the opportunities this creates in opening up new markets, addressing big inflections, is the real value and is the place where applied ventures is a very, very critical part of applied materials. We practice this idea of open innovation, I'm sure most of you know, and ventures plays a very significant part of open innovation philosophy. So this is a funnel, basically an innovation funnel with holes. So what that means is that ideas come out, ideas come in, technologies are in-sourced, are out-licensed, are spin-offs, are acquisitions, and so on. And so we go from different stages of innovation. Discovery, you spend the least amount of money, high fatality rate, and as you go to commercialization, you're talking about hundreds of millions in developing a new product. And as you go from left to right, the rigor goes up. And we call our philosophy, think big, test small, fail fast, learn quick, identify the inflections before others can, hopefully, develop building blocks. And one of the biggest learnings for me in coming to Silicon Valley 16 years ago, I think, is not only the product, which is really important, but the business model is even more important, especially if you're looking at new markets for a company. And again, ventures plays a very important role in being able to test those new business models. And accelerating time to market is where you turn an idea into a business. So we have a good advisory board that really makes sure that we don't drink our own Kool-Aid and opens the doors. I got a couple of Nobel Prize winners and presumably at least one more Nobel Prize winner in the next couple of years, a couple of university presidents, but really thought leaders who are global experts in being able to think about these inflections and advise us on how we can apply our materials engineering to turn ideas into businesses. So let me talk about applied ventures and my 60-second elevator pitch to my board of directors or anyone else who wants to hear is that we are not the oldest CVC in the world, although we've been around for 22 years. We're not the biggest CVC in the world, although we have 90 companies we have invested in. We are not the most profitable, but certainly we have been in the top quartile for the entire history of applied ventures. But we are certainly the most aligned with the goals of the parent corporation. So we take pride in that, and we are a very critical instrument in realizing and recognizing the goals of applied materials. So our fund is roughly about $100 million a year, and we invest in early stage. The check size is anywhere from $1 to $5 million. Late stage typically is $10 to $15 million, although we have written checks as big as $40 million, and we have $400 million invested at this point. And we have 90 companies in deep tech across 17 countries. And we lead, we co-invest, and we take observer seat, but increasingly we are also taking a board seat in strategic companies. We have many IPOs, quite a few actually in the last couple of years, a dozen or so in our history, and there are about another half a dozen in the next couple of years going to IPO. Multiple M&As and greater than $250 million, and some smaller ones. And we also have a couple of unicorns in our portfolio. We invest in core, which is basically semiconductors for us, and display. And our portfolio is roughly 50% in the core markets, core and display, Another 50% is really looking at new inflections where we believe we can take our technology and make those inflections happen, work with the startups and make them successful, consequently grow our revenue, grow our profitable revenue. Where we invest is what we call the lab to fab chasm. So, universities, research labs, inventors can make new devices, one Cs, two Cs, maybe even hundreds. But the real value is in being able to take that, convert that idea from a lab and into a fab. What I mean by that is being able to make hundreds of millions of those units or billions of those units, so you can, again, take an idea and turn it into $1 billion business. And that's exactly where we invest. With funding, providing manufacturing know-how, giving access to channels, and certainly work with the might of Applied Materials with these companies and making them successful. Again, the story I'm trying to tell here, I think, is it is very important for CVC to be aligned with the goals of the company. Then you have access to the entire might of the company in making those startups successful, as well as realize the strategic goals of the parent company. So where does Applied Ventures fit in? We have 4 strategies: invest to learn. Typically, when we invest in a company, we are trying to understand about a new market, about a new device, about a new disruption. And then some of them turn into invest to acquire. So we have acquired some companies from our portfolio, but that's not a necessity when we invest. Where it makes sense, we can certainly think about that, and that plays into as a strategy. Supply chain have become extremely critical. Supply chain resiliency is something that is on everyone's mind. In the past, we would work on supply chain when we are looking at new markets, but Applied Ventures has become a critical part of what we call supply chain 2.0 for the company, and supply chain resiliency has become a very critical part of being able to meet your obligations and commitments to customers in this complex world today. Again, when we look at the new business models, not only the product is important, but equally important is the business model. And ventures is a great way we can work with these new companies and test new business models, because in the end, market doesn't care. Market only cares about whether you can meet the needs of the market with the right product, right business models, and right collaborations and cooperations. So we define materials engineering rather broadly, and the best way to think of this is deep tech. We obviously have investments in data economy, AI and big data, which is right at the heart of what we do. And the game there is basically reduce computational energy per a bit of computation. Actually, there is a study by SRC, Semiconductor Research Corporation, a couple of years ago. If you do nothing, the global energy is insufficient to do computing by 2040. So you really need to reduce the computational energy to enable this entire AI revolution. And there are many, many disruptive technologies, all the way from quantum computing, DNA storage, new memory architectures, and so on. And sensors and communication, again, something in the heart of what we do, is about enabling Industry 4.0 or autonomy, in very, very broad terms, basically. Connectivity, there is a recognition that AR, VR devices are going to be the next computing and communication device after smartphone, and that in combination with 5G and 6G is going to disrupt the world, and we look at investments in that context as well. Climate change, this is certainly a problem for our generation, and especially if you're looking at transportation. Roughly half of the carbon generated in the world is from the transportation industry, and the electrification of vehicles is obviously a big disruption. And there, our interest is basically how do you make electric vehicles competitive, cost parity with internal combustion engine, and that happens when the battery cost reaches $60 per kilowatt hour. And the second thing that needs to happen is that within 5 minutes, you want to have the ability to charge the battery something like 150 miles. So all of a sudden, you can use the gas station infrastructure to be able to make electrification of vehicles ubiquitous. And the last one, not the least one, is personal health and precision health. Again, we believe that materials engineering capabilities can really solve some of the biggest healthcare challenges. So the most important thing is that if you look at any of those challenges, we have associated investments. And in fact, many a times, our first salvo is a venture investment to be able to understand what we call high-value problems, to be able to see where there is a fit for our technology to solve some of those problems, what sort of collaborations and what sort of agreements that we can have with these companies so we can enable them and grow the company profitably. So for example, if you're looking at AI and big data, we have invested in Sentient, which is working on an AI chip with the lowest energy consumption. Kepler is working on a ferroelectric RAM, the next generation memory architecture, basically. Inpia is a company that worked on extreme UV lithography materials and got acquired by Japan Synthetic Rubber, JSR. IR Labs is basically working on photonics, silicon photonics, which is the next big thing if you are looking at interconnect technology. In the case of sensors and communication, we have invested in echo imaging. I think it is well on its way to be a unicorn. And Industry 4.0, we have invested in Makina Rocks. Connectivity, we have invested in a couple of companies related to AR, VR. Metalens and Rockley Photonics are two examples, and Rockley went public recently. Climate change, we invested in Zen Labs, Solid Energy, which is a leader in HAPS and drones and eVTOL. Again, they have gone recently public with a very attractive return for Applied Ventures and Applied Materials. And we have invested in multiple solar companies in the past, and we have some investments in LED companies and so on. In the context of health and longevity, we have invested in Resilience Bio, which is a unicorn, and they're basically trying to be TSMC of the biopharma, essentially have a foundry model and being able to address the needs of the biopharma industry. Ultiview is a proteomics company, basically spatial proteomics, so you can digitally barcode proteins in an intact tissue and get new insights about biological expressions, and as a result of that, you can come up with new cures. And we invested in a small pharma public company. Again, this is not comprehensive. The point here is that we think very strategically about the big problems facing multiple verticals and have a thesis on where we can make a difference, and Applied Ventures plays a big role in making these investments, validating the thesis. So what we do currently, we call it CVC 2.0, and the difference between what we used to do, 1.0 if you want to call it, and 2.0 is the following. In the past, we would only be interested in strategic and financial returns, but now it is a very implicit and explicit driver of growth for Applied Materials. And in fact, we have a growth goal for Applied Ventures enabled revenue for Applied Materials. In the past, we would take a vertical and make some investments, but now we have much more focused and thesis-driven portfolio development. Pick a particular area and make more than one investment to enable that and enable our growth. We also place a premium in addition to on exits on successful partnerships, including the acquisitions now. We take pride. We actually have joint development agreements, basically with more than 90% of the investments that we made. So they're already strategic, but now we are much more comprehensive in the way we are interacting with these companies, whether it is providing technology or channel access or business engagement. So a multi-dimensional relationship. it's not only driven by the venture team, now the entire company is participating in some way in working with these companies, making them successful, get a return on our equity. And we are 100% funded by parent in the past, but I'll show you that we are working with multiple stakeholders, other stakeholders, and creating joint funds in places where we live and work and where we have big business. And one other thing Ventures is really playing an important role is that we are actually spinning out companies where we have developed some key technologies, but figured out they would actually prosper better outside than inside. And the AV know-how really helping us in being able to spin out these companies. They're playing an important role in supply chain 2.0, as I mentioned, and JVs. So just a quick example of some of the things that we are doing. We have created 3 funds, one with Taiwan, with ITIC, which is the parent company that incubated TSMC and UMC. And we have created a fund with Korean government subsidiary. It's called KVIC. And the first fund was very successful. We had 3 IPOs. And there is another fund that is underway, close to $100 million. We are looking for other people who want to participate in that fund. And we also have a fund with Empire State Development Agency of New York State, and where we have a $30 million fund. So we're kicking the tires, and we're learning new things. And we believe that these kind of partnerships is a way we can accelerate. And the startups can also have access to non-dilutive funding as a result of instruments like this. So this is just one example about how we are thinking about CVC 2.0, thinking much bigger than what Applied Materials can do alone. So just one example, then I would wrap it up, is how the corporate interests are intimately tied to what Applied Ventures does, for example. So several years ago, we have identified that energy storage is a critical inflection. And we have come up with a technology that can increase the energy density, do the fast charge, drive the cost per kilowatt hour down. But we wanted to see if this thesis really has merit, and we invested in Solve Energy. Over the next 7-8 years, we would develop the tools, work with them, and they have become a leader in eVTOL and HAPS applications. And we are turning this into a business, and in the process, Solid Energy has gone to IPO. So there is an intimate relationship where we are enabling them, but at the same time, we are actually developing a new market that's synergistic with the startup. So I have my team here. Anand Kamanavar, who's here, leads the Applied Ventures group. And Brad is here, John Way is here, Rajesh, and YP, and Blair. So we are in full force, being next door to Silicon Valley here. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, John.
Yep.
That's really great.
I was just asking if I could distribute his slides, so he's going to clean it up and sanitize it, and then I can get it out to you if you'd like a copy. We're going to move into a networking break right now for about